fuck is that thing? I've always found solace in the forest. Growing up, I spent countless afternoons wandering beneath the towering pines that bordered my grandfather's cabin, enthralled by the hush of the woods and the crunchy carpet of pine needles underfoot. It's funny how a place that once held so much comfort could transform, almost overnight, into something so terrifying. But that's the nature of mystery, I suppose. It twists the familiar into the unknown. And on that cold September evening, the unknown took the shape of something I never thought I'd see outside of tabloid headlines and conspiracy websites. I was alone that weekend, there to clear some dead trees that had fallen during a recent storm. By day, I busied myself with my chainsaw, cutting logs for firewood. By dusk, I would settle by the fireplace inside the cabin, sipping coffee and planning the next day's chores. The nights there were typically peaceful. But the second evening, as I stood on the porch staring out at the darkening tree line, a feeling of unease washed over me. At first I couldn't tell what was wrong. The forest felt heavier. The wind through the pines seemed to carry a warning rather than a gentle lullaby. I told myself it was just exhaustion from hauling lumber all day. Still, I found it nearly impossible to shake the sensation that I was being watched. That night, I was yanked from a light sleep by a strange noise outside, a low groan that might have been an animal in distress. Flicking on the porch light, I peered through the window. The thin beams illuminated gnarled trunks and the debris-strewn yard, but nothing else. Grabbing my grandfather's old hunting rifle for peace of mind, I stepped outside. The night was sharp with chill. My breath formed clouds in the beam of the porch light. Then I heard it again, this time to my left, a distinct grunt echoing behind a stand of pines. I advanced, heart hammering against my rib cage. From behind the pines, I heard a rustle. The pine needles on the ground shifted as something big moved through them, something far larger than any deer. I whispered a shaky hello into the night, though I'm not sure who or what I expected to answer. Another grunt, and this time I caught a glimpse. A massive upright figure moving between tree trunks. It had to be over 7 feet tall, covered in dark hair, disappearing among the branches faster than my eyes could follow. I froze in place, my rifle at the ready, but I didn't dare fire. My mind went blank, torn between logic and instinct. Could this be a bear standing on its hind legs? I'd heard stories of black bears doing that, but this silhouette was far too broad in the shoulders and too quick on 2 feet. My heart, pounding like a drumbeat, was telling me that I had just glimpsed something beyond explanation, something I'd never truly believed in before, a Bigfoot. I stumbled back toward the cabin, locking the door behind me. My mind raced, conjuring every rumor I'd ever heard about Sasquatch sightings. In the safety of the living room, I grabbed my phone only to realize I had no signal. My rational mind insisted it was impossible, that I'd probably just seen a bear. But fear is a powerful force, and I couldn't push away the massive shape I'd glimpsed. The next morning, curiosity and dread waged war within me. Despite my anxiety, I felt compelled to investigate. Armed again with the rifle, I walked out to the tree line where I thought I'd seen the figure. It didn't take long to find tracks, enormous footprints pressed into the damp soil, each easily twice the size of my own. The stride was huge. Whatever made these tracks wasn't just big, it was powerful. Kneeling down, I felt that same prickling sense of being watched, like a static charge in the air. I tried to dismiss the possibility, but each step further into the forest revealed more signs. Snapped branches nearly 9 feet off the ground, matted down sections of brush that looked like bedding, and a distinct musky odor in the air. My mind was racing, but I forced myself to keep calm. If this was a Bigfoot, It was likely just as wary of me as I was of it. At least that's what I told myself to keep from panicking. As the day wore on, I felt a pressure in the woods, as if something was shadowing me but never revealing itself fully. Once, I caught a fleeting motion in my peripheral vision, a flash of dark fur weaving swiftly between the trees. Then it was gone. I couldn't help but wonder if it was playing with me, intentionally staying just at the edge of my sight. When dusk began to settle, I knew I had to return to the cabin. Every step back felt like a retreat from some primeval world. By the time I reached the porch, the last rays of sun had vanished. The door closed with a thud that seemed unnaturally loud, snapping me from my anxious trance. I locked the deadbolt, moved a chair to block the handle, and built up a roaring fire in the fireplace. Even then, the warmth did nothing to calm the cold dread roosting in my chest. Shortly after midnight, it came. The sound was a deep, guttural howl that reverberated through the cabin walls. My whole body tensed. It was close, far too close. I rushed to the window just in time to see a massive shape smash against my truck parked a few yards away. Metal squealed. The figure turned, and for an instant, I locked eyes with it. Its face, a pesque, yet disturbingly human, reflected a wild intelligence. I felt the blood drain from my face. Then it let out another deafening roar, echoing through the silent forest. It bounded toward the trees in 3 powerful strides and disappeared. My truck lay on its side, battered, the windshield shattered. I stood there, heart in my throat, uncertain of whether to follow or hide. Was it a challenge? A warning? In that moment, I was sure of only one thing. I was outmatched. As the hours crawled toward dawn, my mind spiraled with questions. If I stayed, would it return? If I tried to leave on foot, would it hunt me down? I considered making a break for it, but one glance at the wrecked truck told me that was impossible. When morning finally broke, I crept outside cautiously. The footprints were everywhere, circling the cabin, pressed in the mud around the broken truck. The significance was clear. It had shown me its power. I packed what I could into my grandfather's old backpack and started down the overgrown path that led toward the nearest road, rifle clutched in sweating palms. I kept my eyes scanning the tree line, half expecting a massive, fur-covered figure to charge out of the underbrush. But the woods remained silent, as though it was letting me go. Maybe I had been deemed not worth the trouble, or maybe this creature, this Bigfoot, if that's what it was, had made its point. I can't fully explain what I saw that weekend. Many won't believe me, and that's fine. I still see that face when I close my eyes. Those eyes, so deep with understanding, haunt my dreams. I've vowed never to return to my grandfather's cabin, though I've heard the property sits empty, battered by weather and time. Some nights I lie awake, imagining that towering figure in the pines, stalking the silent clearing beneath a star-scattered sky. A reminder that in the deep woods there are things that defy explanation, and maybe it's best they remain undisturbed. I've been obsessed with the night sky for as long as I can remember. As a kid, I'd spend hours with my cheap plastic telescope aimed at the stars, dreaming about extraterrestrial civilizations and cosmic wonders. Most of my friends grew out of such fascinations, but I never did. Even as an adult, I'd frequently drive out to the forest, where light pollution was minimal, simply to marvel at galaxies hidden by the city glow. If I had known what horror awaited me on that frigid autumn night, I might have burned my telescope instead. The drive took me 2 hours into a remote area of pine and maple trees, their leaves rustling in a slight breeze. I set up camp in a small clearing where the canopy opened enough to reveal a panorama of constellations. Around midnight, I saw it, a sudden brilliant streak of light that arced across the sky, unlike any meteor I'd witnessed before. It glowed an eerie green, trailing sparks behind it. Instead of fading, it plummeted beyond the trees with a flash that lit up the forest for a split second. My heart hammered with excitement. Maybe it was some rare meteorite, I thought, possibly even extraterrestrial debris. Grabbing my flashlight, I hurried in the direction of the impact, the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots echoing through the silent woods. A strange odor hung in the air, like ozone mixed with something acrid. I didn't have to walk far before I stumbled upon a scorched circle of earth. Steam rose from the ground, and the surrounding trees bore blackened leaves curled at the edges. At the center of this smouldering patch stood a sleek, metallic structure about the size of a large van. It pulsed with a faint green glow, and the surface was utterly smooth, reflecting the moonlight in ripples. It wasn't a meteor. It was a craft of some kind, a ship that had fallen out of the sky. A cocktail of fear and curiosity coursed through me, but my feet moved of their own accord, drawing me closer. As I edged near, a panel on the craft slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing an interior bathed in pulsing lights. A sense of dread seized my lungs. I knew I should back away, call someone, anyone. But my curiosity overrode all caution. I took a step inside, my flashlight wavering over strange symbols lining the metallic corridor. Suddenly, the doorway snapped shut behind me, plunging me into darkness broken only by flickering alien lights. My flashlight died instantly, as though the energy was siphoned out of it. I slammed my palms against the sealed door, panic rising in my throat. No response. Then the hallway ahead of me began to glow brighter, beckoning me forward. I was trapped, so I walked, each step magnifying the electric hum in my ears. At the end of the corridor, I entered a chamber that made my heart drop into my stomach. The walls were lined with cylinders, each containing a sludgy, bluish fluid. Inside these cylinders, I could make out human limbs, arms, legs, floating lifelessly. Some cylinders contained entire torsos or partial remains of what must have once been people. My pulse thundered in my ears. I felt sick, fought the urge to retch, and staggered backward. Before I could react, something slimy latched onto my ankle, a serpentine appendage that snaked from the shadows. I screamed and tried to kick free, but more appendages wrapped around my arms, my chest, immobilizing me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. Tall, gaunt figures with elongated skulls, huge black eyes, and spindly limbs that seemed to bend in unnatural ways. Aliens. Real, living extraterrestrials. My mind screamed that this couldn't be happening, yet it was. They dragged me into another room, stark white and filled with a sickening stench, like chemicals mixed with blood. A row of metal tables stood in the middle, each equipped with restraints. The room vibrated with an eerie, droning sound that bore into my head. One of the creatures pressed a needle-like device against my neck, and everything went numb. When I regained awareness, I was flat on my back, my limbs strapped down. The aliens hovered over me, their eyes expressionless but somehow malicious. I heard a buzzing whir, felt pressure on my arms and legs, then a burning pain so intense I blacked out, only to be jolted awake by more pain. My screams echoed off the cold walls. Then, with numb horror, I saw what they were doing, slicing through my flesh with precision instruments, severing my arms and legs. Blood splattered across the table. My vision blurred. I screamed until my throat tore. At some point, I must have lost consciousness again. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't move. I had no limbs left to move. Confusion and terror merged as I felt my consciousness suspended in a haze. It took me a moment to realize I was submerged in some thick fluid, my head alone kept alive by tubes and electrodes. I was in a jar, like a specimen in a macabre laboratory. The fluid muffled my screams, but my mind shrieked. They kept me in that state. A living head floating in a sealed canister, forced to bear witness to their atrocities. Occasionally, I'd see the aliens drag in new victims, hikers, campers, lost travelers, who had the misfortune of stumbling upon this cursed place. I watched them dissect these poor souls on the same metal tables, arms, legs, torsos, extracted, studied, disposed of. I can't even describe the horror of seeing it happen over and over, powerless to stop anything or even look away. Each time I wanted to close my eyes, but the fluid they kept me in somehow forced them open. Time lost all meaning in that chamber. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a trapped animal, thrashing against the bars of a cage. Occasionally, one of the aliens would approach my jar, peering in with those obsidian eyes. I sometimes felt they were communicating, though I heard no words, just a simmering intelligence that registered my existence as a curiosity at best, a lab specimen at worst. During one of these visits, I thought I saw pity in its eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by cold detachment as it floated away. My only solace was that I had somehow not died from the shock of amputation, yet that was also the worst curse imaginable. To persist as a severed head in a container, forced to watch their endless experiments. I don't know how long I remained in that place. Days, weeks, months. It was an eternity of agony. Then one day, alarms blared throughout the craft. Lights flashed red, and the floor shook violently. I sensed the ship might be taking off, or crashing. My jar rattled. Some of the tubes disconnected. I blacked out as fluid drained from my container, praying for death to finally take me. I awoke sometime later in complete darkness, no longer floating in fluid. I could feel the cold air on my face, but my eyes refused to open. I couldn't breathe. There was no mechanism to let air pass through a body that was no longer there. My senses dimmed. Maybe the ship was destroyed. Maybe I was. Then a flicker of light pierced my eyelids, and I heard faint voices, human voices. A pair of gloved hands lifted my jar, gasping in horror at what they saw. I tried to speak, but no sound emerged. In that moment, the terror in their eyes told me everything. I was still alive, and they had found me. The rest is blurred. They say they pried open the craft somewhere in these deep woods, rescuing what remained of me. Doctors, government agents, who knows? My consciousness lingers in a delirium of pain and delirious clarity. I wish it hadn't ended this way, that I'd never seen the falling star. But it did, and I have no limbs to run or arms to hide my eyes. Only the memory of those endless nights, witnessing what unthinkable horrors lurk just beyond our safe little world. And now I wait, still trapped in a jar, forever haunted by what I saw in that alien chamber. I'd heard rumors of a reclusive hermit living in the untamed stretch of forest bordering my uncle's property. Tales circulated about his ragged clothes, wild eyes, and menacing presence, like a cryptid that existed on the outskirts of civilization. I was never one to believe such stories. That changed when I found myself alone in the woods, off trail, and far from anyone who could help me if trouble came. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. My plan: hike deep into the forest, set up camp near a stream, and relish 2 days of solitude away from the city's noise. The first day passed uneventfully. I pitched my tent under the canopy, gathered firewood, and cooked a modest meal. The crackle of the flames lulled me into a sense of safety, and the symphony of nocturnal insects sang me to sleep. The next morning, while foraging for berries along a slope, I thought I heard a branch snap behind me. I turned, expecting maybe a deer, but saw nothing. Dismissing it as an overactive imagination, I continued hiking along the ridgeline to explore. That's when I noticed footprints in the soft earth, a single trail of bare feet, the soles calloused and large. It struck me as odd. Barefoot this deep into the woods? The prints were fresh too, perhaps an hour old at most. A shiver rippled through me. The rumoured hermit came to mind. As midday approached, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. In the distance, half hidden by brush, stood a man. His clothes were tattered and mismatched, a ragged coat clinging to his emaciated frame. His hair hung in unkempt tangles around a face that was more shadow than features. I froze, heart pounding. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other, neither moving. Then, with a feral speed, he darted away into the undergrowth, vanishing like a ghost. Alarmed, I retreated to my campsite. Every rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. I tried to calm myself. Perhaps he was just another camper in dire need of clothing, but deep down I couldn't shake the unsettling vibe he exuded. Still, the day drifted on, and as dusk approached, I built another fire. I was determined not to let fear ruin my weekend. That resolve cracked when night fell. Something snapped just outside the flickering glow of my fire. I spun around, flashlight in hand, scanning the darkness. That's when I saw him again, crouched behind a tree. His eyes gleamed with a wild, predatory shine. This time, he didn't run. Instead, he straightened up, revealing a worn hunting knife clasped in his right hand. My stomach lurched. "Who are you?" I called, voice trembling despite my attempt at composure. No response. He just watched me for a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly. Then he moved, fast, bounding forward like an animal. I scrambled backward, nearly falling into the fire. Panic seized my thoughts. I grabbed the nearest branch from my woodpile, brandishing it in front of me like a makeshift weapon. He slashed at me with the knife, clipping my forearm. Pain flared hot, and warm blood trickled down my skin. I screamed, swinging the branch in desperate arcs. The hermit snarled, baring teeth that seemed sharper than they had any right to be. Before he could close in again, I landed a clumsy blow to his shoulder. He yelped, a guttural, inhuman sound, and staggered back. Taking that chance, I bolted into the darkness, leaving behind my tent and supplies. The forest swallowed me up. Branches tore at my clothes, scratched my face, and slowed my progress. My breath came in ragged gulps as I sprinted, my heart thundering like a war drum. After what felt like an eternity, I risked a glance over my shoulder. No sign of him, but paranoia ate at me. Could he be just behind that thicket, or crouching behind the next tree? Eventually, I found a dry creek bed and collapsed onto the rocks, pressing my hand against the bleeding cut on my arm. The moon provided faint illumination, turning the forest into a patchwork of silver and black. I listened, nothing but my panting breath and the distant hoot of an owl. For a moment, relief washed over me. Perhaps I'd lost him, but that false sense of safety lasted only a moment. A twig snapped. I jolted upright, scanning the shadows with wide eyes. The hermit emerged from behind a boulder, his expression twisted with rage or hunger. I couldn't tell. My adrenaline surged. I stumbled upright, ignoring the stabbing pain in my arm, and resumed my flight. The next hour blurred in a frantic haze of fear. I raced deeper into the woods, disoriented and frantic, half the time unsure if I was being followed or just driven mad by dread. At some point, I tripped over a root, slamming into the forest floor. Pain radiated through my left knee, nearly knocking the breath from my lungs. In the moonlight, I spotted a hollow space beneath an uprooted tree. Clawing at leaves and dirt, I wedged myself inside, praying the darkness would conceal me. My pulse pounded in my ears like thunder. There I lay, each second feeling like a year, my mind conjuring images of the hermit's knife glinting in the moonlight. I tried to steady my breathing, to mask any sound that might give me away. The forest was silent again, as though even the nocturnal creatures were holding their breath. Then came the soft crunch of footsteps on dried leaves. My heart froze. Through a tiny gap in the roots, I saw his ankles, filthy, scratched, the nails thick with dirt. He moved slowly, as if sniffing the air. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. I bit my lip to keep from sobbing, the taste of blood mixing with the salt of tears. Then, after a few agonizing minutes, his footsteps receded. Cautiously, I emerged from the roots, glancing around to confirm he was gone. I wanted to run, but my knee throbbed. I hobbled forward, one agonizing step at a time, leaning on low branches and trunks to keep from collapsing. My only objective: get out of these cursed woods and find help. Dawn's first light seeped through the canopy, revealing more of my surroundings. The terrain finally began to look familiar, an old logging trail that led back toward my uncle's land. I pressed on, wincing with every step, sweat and blood caking my clothes. The mere thought of seeing the hermit again propelled me forward, fueled by raw terror. I must have walked for hours. The forest grew thinner, the underbrush less dense. Finally, I spotted a break in the trees, a gravel road winding lazily beneath an overcast sky. Relief mingled with exhaustion. I practically collapsed onto the roadside. A passing truck found me there, half delirious, covered in cuts and bruises. The driver, an elderly man, sprang out and rushed over, calling for help. In the weeks that followed, the police scoured the woods but found no sign of the hermit. No footprints, no camp, nothing. A part of me wonders if he's still out there, skulking among the pines and shadows, watching for lone hikers to cross his path. The nightmares haven't stopped. I'll wake in a cold sweat, convinced I see a ragged silhouette lurking at the edge of my bedroom. Sometimes, I even imagine I hear him breathing just inches from my ear. I never went back to those woods, nor do I plan to. I don't care how irrational it seems to outsiders. I know what I saw, and I know how close I came to never escaping that forest alive. Some things out there in the wilderness move more like beasts than men, and if you're unlucky enough to meet one of them, you'd better run fast, or hide deep, or be prepared to fight for your life, or